Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard Podcast. On this episode, going to be continuing the Eulogy series. The Houston Rockets were eliminated from the playoffs, so going to be discussing their season as a whole as well as their prospects moving forward. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe for weekly content. Also, the podcasts are now up on Spotify, so you can listen to the full episode uninterrupted there. And if there's a spot you agree with, disagree with, either reach out to us on Twitter or in that comment section, and we'd love to discuss with you. To the surprise of no one, the Houston Rockets have officially been eliminated from the playoffs. And at this stage in the Eulogy series, I really don't find it necessary to dive into the team numbers as to why these bottom-feeding teams are losing. Some of them, like the Magic and the Pistons before the Rockets here, weren't put together with any intention of winning many games. And the Rockets entering this season likely had the most blatant tanking approach. They literally sent the second highest paid player in the league home in John Wall, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. I think it's pretty hard to be upset at the Rockets for entering this complete teardown because they were sort of forced into it against their will. Entering last season, the Rockets had every intention of retooling around James Harden. They made a Russell Westbrook, John Wall swap. They took a flyer on DeMarcus Cousins and brought in Christian Wood, an underrated small ball five who was supposed to be the next James Harden pick and roll partner. But Harden had other ideas. And when the team stated that they had no intentions of trading him, he decided he was just going to get really out of shape and just give terrible effort on a nightly basis, which is a move that he repeated this year with the Nets to get moved to Philadelphia. So the Rockets were forced to move off of James Harden. And since they had a team that was designed around his skill set, without him, any hope of being competitive was completely lost. They really didn't get much back for that trade either. The decision to go with another kind of low-quality draft pick or later first-round pick versus just taking Jared Allen was not great. And then also taking Victor Oladipo back instead of Karis LeVert was not a great decision in hindsight either. At the time, even, I would have rather had LeVert. He was younger, on a longer contract. He still had some upside versus Oladipo, who was coming off of pretty serious injuries. And for the Oladipo part of it, it's especially heinous because later that season, they end up trading him for two expiring contracts, neither guy they even brought back, and then a pick swap in this year's draft with Miami. Last season, even, there was no chance, like looking forward, that the Rockets were going to have a better chance than Miami. So they basically just gave away Victor Oladipo for nothing and got nothing for that part of the trade. So at the end of the day, here with Harden, they get back a Nets first-round pick this year, Cavs first-round pick this year, neither of which are going to be very high. I guess with the Nets kind of struggles, it's looking a little bit better than we would have thought entering the season, but it's still not going to be like a very high draft pick in all likelihood. And they're also ending up with the 2024 Nets pick, 2026 Nets pick, and then swaps in 23, 25, and 27. So unless something really crazy happens where I'm not sure how the play-in factors into the lottery stuff, because I expect the Nets to kind of make it out of the play-in. So I don't know if they kind of redo the lottery once the actual playoffs start, or if it's just entirely based off of record, because that may affect things for the Rockets potentially. But at the very least, the Nets are going to be likely to be better than the Rockets until I would say at least that 2026 draft, maybe the 2025 one. I think the 27 pick is guaranteed to be a good pick. It's conceivable that Durant would still be around, but at that point, he's going to be very old or retired at the very least. And maybe that 26 and 25 pick are okay or pretty good. So not too great of a haul, because they could have taken some young, more proven assets back, guys like Jared Allen, versus just taking like a whole slew of draft picks. And so obviously last season and this season were completely lost. With last season, they end up getting the second pick in the draft and take this ultra athletic scoring machine, shooting guard type player in Jalen Green, and thus begins this youth movement in Houston. So a year into this process, it's clear the Rockets still have a very long way to go before they are ready to compete again. And while there are some pieces here that have shown some real potential, I still think they're further behind in this process when compared to the teams I covered last week in the Magic and Pistons. And it isn't for talent reasons. It's more because it's still really unclear how any of the talent that Houston has fits together. In general, though, I really like how hard this team competes. They give really great effort on a nightly basis, and I think head coach Stephen Silas deserves a lot of credit for that. And for the Silas piece of this, I really do feel bad for him. He was brought in to kind of take the next step with the James Harden heliocentric offense, but he never got a chance to implement that. Imagine signing on as a coach thinking you're going to have the chance to really compete in the playoffs and maybe even potentially compete for a title, and then you blink and all of a sudden you're rebuilding right away. So I hope that they give him a chance to coach, at least until they could start to get this thing turned around, because otherwise that's just a really raw deal for him. So their leading scorer this season was Christian Wood. He's putting up about 18 a game with 10 rebounds. And with the ability to stretch the floor out to the three-point line, he's just a really solid big guy and a really solid option in this modern era of basketball. And at only 26 years old, you might think I would really be lobbying for the Rockets to keep him as a part of their future, but that just isn't the case. Christian Wood, like Silas, signed on for an entirely different situation than the one that's played out here. And it's clear he really isn't interested in being a part of a lengthy rebuild. He's had some locker room issues this season. And just in general, when you watch the Rockets play, there are times where his body language just outright sucks. And I can't say as I blamed him. If I signed on to play with James Harden, expected to be in the playoffs, and then overnight we're struggling to win 20 games in a season, I would feel some type of way about that. He is going to have value on the trade market as a great role guy in the pick and roll who rebounds and can space the floor out to the three-point line. So I think they should capitalize on his value. That way his negative attitude doesn't rub off on their young guys. His partner in the post is Alfred Şengün, an extremely skilled rookie big guy fresh off an MVP season in the Turkish League. I've talked about before how I'm all in on these rookies who win MVPs in overseas leagues, sort of like in the G League. You're playing against grown men over there and grown professionals. And for a kid to dominate the way he did, or in Luka Doncic's case, the way that he did, it really speaks to their skill and toughness. And while the Turkish league isn't as good as the league that Luka played in, it's still one of the more respected basketball leagues outside of the NBA. Şengün has really impressed me this year offensively. And while the 19-year-old's numbers aren't that impressive at 9 points a game, 5 rebounds, the eye test has been really impressive. Şengün has some real scoring skill in the post and has very impressive footwork. Even on drives, he can execute just these flawless Euro steps or spins in the lane. And then passing-wise, he's also really impressive. He's able to make good reads, hit cutters, even with like no-look passes. I hesitate to call him a poor man's Jokic. It's more like the homeless version of Jokic, but his game does show some similarities. I do worry about him defensively, though. He is bad on that end and bordering on being an outright disaster. And for him, that will be the question mark when it comes to his longevity in the league. At only 6'9", are you going to be able to get away with him at the 5 in the future? He has time. He can bulk up a little bit. If he learns where to be and when to be there, that's going to go a long way for him. I also briefly want to mention Jae'Sean Tate and KJ Martin, both as like wings, 3, stretch 4s. I really like what both of them bring athletically, defensively, and they can hit some threes. But I think at the end of their career, they're going to end up being no more than good role players on a good team, which is still really solid and really solid pieces to have. But I don't want to spend too much time on them. Rookie Jalen Green is the second leading scorer at nearly 16 a game for them. And for Green, it probably hasn't been the rookie year that he or the Rockets fans or the Rockets in general had hoped for, but this roster really isn't designed to put his talents on display. He might not even be first team all rookie this year. And as the second overall pick, that might seem to be a bit of a disappointment. And you would be right, but this year it speaks more to the quality of this year's draft class than a slight on Green. That being said, it's clear he has a lot of development to do, and it's going to be a long road for him to capitalize on his massive potential. But as I mentioned, this roster gets in his way more than anything. Also, if I could continue to be positive for Green, his issues or deficiencies are all extremely fixable. Green, at least offensively, has every tool in the toolbox, every skill, every shot. He's got the handles. He's just got everything that you would want from an elite scorer in the NBA. There just really aren't many holes in his offensive game, nothing that he needs to add from scratch. He seems to just have it all. It's just a matter of him finding a way to be more consistent and polishing those skills that are already there. Also, basketball IQ-wise, he just needs to learn what is a good shot. Too many times it seems like he's settling for a tough step back three or a tough mid-range shot. He's a freak athlete, and he's only getting to the line about 3 times a game. Green is the type of athlete that should be near the top of the league in terms of free throw attempts. Also, defensively, I would like to see him give better effort and just be better on that end in general. But all of these issues I just mentioned are extremely fixable, and they might fix themselves if there's a more thoughtfully put together team around him. Kevin Porter Jr. is his backcourt mate, and you might think that I would be really high on a 21-year-old putting up about 14 points a game and 6 assists, but it's really not the case. KPJ has all the talent in the world, but he's already had issues in the locker room with both stops in his very short NBA career. And fit-wise, I'm not sure that I like him and Green together as a backcourt. And I really feel like some of Green's questionable shot selection can be attributed to KPJ. And while 6 assists a game is nothing to sneeze at times I feel like that's a little bit overblown. He gets a lot of those Russell Westbrook assists where he dribbles the ball for 20 seconds of the shot clock just to hit a spot-up shooter who has to fire away as the shot clock expires. KPJ, like Green, takes some really difficult step backs, mid-range shots, and like Green is only getting to the line 3 times a game. That's just not enough for a guy as athletic and skilled as Porter. So I think that some of KPJ's bad habits shooting wise are rubbing off on Green, but also because Porter can be so ball dominant, it might be the case that when Green finally does get the ball, he's like, screw you guys, I'm taking this shot, I'm making this move. I haven't seen the ball for 8 minutes. And it might sound like I'm being really hard on KPJ, but I really do like his game and his skill set. And I have no reason to believe, like Green, he can't clean up some of these things with time. The issue I have with him on the Rockets specifically is more of a fit issue. I just don't think that there's room on an NBA roster for 2 smaller gunner-type guards, which kind of gets me to the John Wall piece of this. I, for the life of me, do not understand what the Rockets are doing with Wall. I know that they tried to trade him, but there just aren't any takers at that salary figure. And I also understand them not wanting to take shots away and playing time away from the young guys. But a point guard is just what the doctor ordered here developmentally for this Rockets group. Porter and Green specifically really need someone to feed them the ball to set up their scoring opportunities as opposed to doing it themselves. And I think the bad habits that they're forming are far more destructive than them getting a few less shots or a few less touches like they would by playing with John Wall. Also, just from a moral perspective in general, I'm really against you just sending a guy home who wants to play but also not buying him out. Like, if you don't want him, it just seems really crappy to me to be like, well, we don't want you, but no one else can have you either. And I understand them not wanting to buy him out. Like, they don't want to just throw $90 million out the window and have $90 million of dead cap. They get nothing for him. So it's just kind of a bad situation all around. I wish there was some type of rule change or something that could kind of catch these situations. I just wish there was a better solution. As far as the draft and the offseason go, I'm going to keep this really brief in the interest of not just repeating myself over and over because it's going to be a very similar prognosis to both the Magic and the Pistons. The Rockets, like those two other teams I just mentioned, are really pinning all of their hopes on the ping pong balls. And like the Magic, they really need to stay in the top three in this year's draft. The Rockets have a team full of like 6'3" to 6'5" shoot first guards and wings. So the 5 to 10 range is really not going to, in this year's draft, is really not going to help them out at all. Like the Magic, any of the Chet, Jabari, or Paolo guys are really going to be great fits on this team and should theoretically be able to play alongside Şengün. The Chet fit is the one that interests me the most because Şengün has the weight to kind of shield Chet from having to guard centers night in and night out, but Chet is going to supply the shot blocking piece that Şengün doesn't have. If they do fall out of the top three, I think Jalen Duren is the way to go. A freak athlete, rim running five, who can be a really great pick and roll partner for Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. I mentioned Christian Wood being potentially on the move, but I also think Eric Gordon is an enticing trade chip. Plenty of teams are going to be interested in adding his scoring punch, so it shouldn't be too difficult to move him. David Nwaba is also a guy that they can move, a defensive wing. That's likely going to be a player you're going to see on the move. Neither have the trade value of Christian Wood, and you likely aren't going to get anything back for either of those players that are going to make a huge difference. But given they aren't a part of your long-term plans, I think it's best to get some value out of them while you can. As far as the rest of the guys on the team, they really have most of their players under contract for next season. Bruno Fernando is a guy who's a free agent, whatever. I would likely let him go, but I don't really care one way or the other. Dennis Schroeder is an absolute let him walk. They don't need another score first guard on this team. Free agency wise, like I mentioned for the Pistons and the Magic, good locker room vets are exactly what they need. And even more so with the Rockets with some of the locker room issues they have had this past year. But outside of that, a really savvy playmaking point guard who can calm things down, set up the offense, and set up scoring chances for these young guys is going to be a must. Ricky Rubio is the guy that first pops into my head from this free agent class. You can also go with a guy like DeLon Wright or Tyus Jones. I just think that they need someone to run the show here so these young guards don't continue to develop bad habits. The Rockets are years away from being competitive and have some tough decisions roster-wise ahead of them. Of the teams I've covered so far, this is the team I've been most lukewarm about their future.